The end of the war didn't come with gunshots for Elsa. It came with silence. A silence so heavy it clung to her skin like dust, the kind you couldn't wash off. By the time the Americans arrived in her village, she was no longer counting days or dead. She was simply waiting to be told where to go, what to do, and whether she still had a future at all. Elsa Richter was 22 years old. She had been working as a radio technician for the Luftwaffe, stationed far from the front lines. Her job had never involved a weapon. She wore a uniform, yes, crisp, gray, and clean, but she had never fired a shot. In truth, she had never wanted to. Like many young German women, she had been pulled into the machinery of war, not because of ideology, but because there had been no choice. The draft had come for women, too, eventually, especially for those who could type, solder wires, or follow orders without question. Her last days in Germany blurred together. The bombings had stopped, the sirens had gone quiet, and in their place came an eerie calm. That was worse. At least the noise had meant someone still cared who lived or died. Now there were only the rumbling of distant trucks and the cawing of crows above abandoned farmhouses. Her unit had been disbanded. The officers disappeared first, some changing into civilian clothes and vanishing into forests. The rest were left to scatter and pray. Elsa had been walking west when she was stopped by 2 American soldiers outside a burned-out inn near Bad Hersfeld. She had no weapons, no resistance, and barely any food. They searched her, asked a few questions in broken German, then radioed in. She wasn't taken to a large camp like she expected. No fences, no guard towers. Instead, they placed her in the back of a supply truck and drove for hours. She didn't ask where. She knew better. The place they took her wasn't a prison, not officially. It was a farmhouse on the outskirts of a small town the Americans had taken weeks ago. The house was old, wooden, with thick stone walls and shuttered windows. It had once belonged to a local family, long gone now. The fields around it were yellow with neglect. Elsa was led inside and told to sit in the parlor. She waited for what felt like hours, alone except for the hum of distant radio static. Then he walked in. Lieutenant John Taylor wasn't what she expected. He was clean-shaven, American through and through, with a quiet confidence that came from winning. He didn't yell. He didn't grab. He sat across from her and read from a clipboard. "You're not combat," he said, as if surprised. "You were Luftwaffe comms?" Elsa nodded. "You speak English?" "A little," she replied. He paused, looked at her again. Then he said something that confused her. "You won't be going to the main camp." She didn't understand. She had assumed all prisoners went to the same place. That was what the Red Cross rules said. That was what the Geneva Convention said. But no one followed the rules anymore. Not really. Over the next few days, Elsa learned that she wasn't alone. Not entirely. 3 other women had been brought to the farmhouse. One from Hamburg, one from Munich, and one who never said where she was from. They weren't kept in cells. They had rooms. Small, sparse, but clean. Food came twice a day. No one was hit. No one was screamed at. But there were always guards. Always eyes. Taylor came to speak with her often. At first, it was about her work, what radio frequencies she had used, what call signs, what encryption codes she remembered. She told him everything she knew, which wasn't much. He seemed pleased. Then the questions changed. Did you believe in what you were doing? Did your family support the Nazis? Did you ever think you'd lose? She didn't know how to answer. He never got angry. He just listened, sometimes with a small smile, sometimes with a cold stare. He seemed fascinated by her, not for what she knew, but for who she was. A piece of the enemy, intact and harmless. After 2 weeks, The other women were taken away. Elsa wasn't. She asked why. No one answered. One morning, she woke to find her uniform gone. In its place was a plain cotton dress, American style. On top sat a folded note. "You'll be more comfortable in this." She wore it, not because she wanted to, but because it was better than waiting naked. That evening, Taylor invited her to dinner. Not a command, but an invitation. The table was set in the dining room. Just the two of them. He served the food himself. Chicken, potatoes, something that resembled apple pie. Elsa barely touched hers. Taylor talked about the war, about what he'd seen in France, in Belgium. He told her about home, Illinois, fishing trips, his brother's farm. "I'm not like the others," he said. "I don't hate you." She looked up. "Then why am I still here?" He didn't answer. The days blurred after that. Elsa wasn't beaten. She wasn't starved. She wasn't forced to do anything, not exactly. But she wasn't free either. She cleaned the rooms. She helped cook. She listened when Taylor wanted to talk. And sometimes she sat quietly as he watched her from across the room, eyes lingering too long. He never touched her. Not then, but his presence was everywhere. In the footsteps outside her door, in the way the guards nodded at her, in the way the other soldiers stopped talking when she entered the room. She wasn't a prisoner by law, but she had become something else, something unnamed. One night, she stood by the window in her room, watching the moonlight stretch across the fields. She thought about her home in Göttingen, about her mother's old piano, about the little garden they used to tend together. She wondered if she'd ever go back, if there was anything to go back to. She heard a knock. When she opened the door, Taylor stood there. He didn't smile. He didn't speak. He stepped inside. She didn't resist, not because she wanted it, but because resistance had become a memory. And because no one had told her how to escape a cage with no bars. After that night, something shifted between them. Taylor no longer asked questions about the war. He stopped mentioning her return, stopped pretending this was temporary. Elsa stopped asking too. It wasn't that she had given in, it was that she no longer believed there was a point. The war had ended for the rest of the world. For her, it was only just beginning. Each morning followed the same routine. A knock on the door, a tray of food, a quiet nod from the soldier assigned to watch her, and then hours of silence, broken only by the creak of wooden floors and the occasional burst of radio chatter from the other room. There were no windows with open views, only slats through which she could catch brief glimpses of the field outside Golden, still and hauntingly quiet. The outside world continued, but she remained suspended in something far more invisible, a limbo that had no rules, no name, and no end. Taylor was always there. Sometimes in the hallway, sometimes just outside the door, but always near enough to remind her she wasn't alone. He brought her books in English she couldn't fully understand. He handed her records and made her sit with him as they played, usually jazz or old swing songs that he claimed were for the soul. He smiled when she listened and watched her with a kind of pride, as if taming something wild. One evening, he brought her a box. Inside were clothed civilian clothes, American clothes. A blue skirt, a cream-colored blouse, even a pair of leather shoes polished to a shine. She didn't ask where he got them. He told her they were hers now. "You don't need the uniform anymore," he said gently. "You're not part of that world." She held the blouse in her hands, fingers grazing the soft fabric. For a moment, she imagined herself in it, walking freely down a street, shopping, laughing. Then she remembered her mother's hands, calloused from work, and the sound of Allied bombs falling outside their apartment. The dream crumbled. "I am still German," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Taylor's smile didn't fade. Not to me. Later that week, she heard voices in the house, new ones. Men speaking English quickly, with clipped accents and short tempers. Military police. She heard them ask about detainees, about transportation schedules. She pressed her ear to the door and heard Taylor's voice too, firm and steady. "No one here fits that description," he said. "These are civilian holds. We're waiting on final clearances." The lie landed like a punch. Civilian holds. As if they weren't prisoners at all, just people waiting on paperwork. The next morning, she saw one of the MPs in the hallway. He looked at her, really looked, and paused. She almost opened her mouth to speak. But Taylor stepped in. "Can I help you, Sergeant?" The man nodded. "Didn't know we had women here." Taylor shrugged. Temporary assignment. The sergeant looked at Elsa once more, then walked away. That night, Taylor was quiet over dinner. He poured wine into a chipped glass and handed it to her. She didn't touch it. "You're safe here," he said suddenly, as if reading her thoughts. She stared at her plate. "Is that what this is?" He didn't answer. The next day, she found a letter on her bed. It was written in English, typed, official-looking. Her name was misspelled, but the meaning was clear. Transfer deferred. Security hold. U.S. command review pending. No date. No instructions. It wasn't just that she wasn't being moved. It was that someone had made sure she never would be. One evening, Taylor asked her to sit outside. The sun was low, casting amber light across the empty field. He brought a blanket and a bottle of wine, and for a moment, it almost felt like something normal. "Almost. I used to imagine this," he said, sipping from his glass. "Peace. Quiet. No more explosions. Just a good evening with someone who doesn't hate me." Elsa didn't respond. He leaned back on his elbows and looked at her. "You don't hate me, do you?" She didn't know what to say. Hate was such a distant thing now. What she felt was harder to name, something between fear, numbness, and the kind of loyalty a dog gives its captor, not out of love, but because there is no one else. Taylor's hand brushed against hers. She flinched, but didn't pull away. That night, she dreamed of her old street, of her brother, dead on the Eastern Front, of her father, arrested in '39 for saying the wrong thing in the wrong place. She woke with tears on her cheeks and a weight in her chest she couldn't shake. The days grew longer. One of the other women, the one from Munich, returned for a night. She looked thinner, more tired, but freer somehow. They spoke briefly in the hallway. "Where were you?" Elsa asked. "They moved us," Ing replied. "A camp in Illinois. It's better there. Real." Elsa's heart jumped. "Did you ask about me?" Ing hesitated. "They said you were under special supervision." "What does that mean?" Ing looked away. "I don't know. Just be careful." And then she was gone again. Elsa waited for days after that. Waited for someone to come, for Taylor to explain, for anything to change. But nothing did. Eventually, she stopped waiting. One morning, she found the radio room empty. Taylor had left a note. Out on inspection. Back by evening. She wandered the house, something she had never dared to do before. The doors weren't locked. The office was open. Inside, she found papers, some typed, some handwritten. Orders, reports. One caught her eye. POW, female, non-combatant. Classified civilian asset. Retain indefinitely. No transfer. It was signed. Not by Taylor. By someone higher. Her heart raced. She folded the paper and slid it into her waistband. That night, she didn't sleep. She kept replaying Ying's words. Be careful. What did it mean to be an asset? Why had she been kept here, hidden, when others were moved? She thought of the times Taylor had touched her wrist, the way he looked at her when she played records, the clothes, the dinners, the silence. This wasn't protection. This was possession, and she was done being owned. Elsa hadn't known what she would do with the document. She hadn't even known she was looking for something when she wandered into Taylor's office. But once it was in her hand, once she read those words, "Retain indefinitely," stamped in bold black letters over her name, something fundamental inside her cracked. Not just anger, not just fear, something deeper, a realization, a truth she could no longer unsee. She was not being forgotten. She was being kept out the following morning. She folded the document into the lining of her shoe. She moved carefully, mechanically, pretending nothing had changed. Taylor returned just before dusk. His boots were dusty, his sleeves rolled. He looked tired, but relaxed, like a man returning home, not to a prison, but to a life he'd built piece by piece. He smiled when he saw her. "Miss me?" She didn't answer. She didn't have to. He filled the silence with updates about his day, some inspection run, something about fuel rations and lazy recruits. She listened without hearing. Every sentence he spoke layered over the truth she now carried, muffling it, suffocating it. That night, she didn't eat. Taylor noticed. "You feeling all right?" She nodded. "Sure?" Another nod. He leaned back in his chair and stared at her for a long moment. "You know, you don't have to be scared of me." "I'm not scared," she said. And that was true. What she felt was no longer fear. It was strategy. For the next several days, she played her part. She read the books he gave her. She sat beside him during records. She accepted the food, even when it made her stomach churn. She waited, quietly, patiently, observing every guard rotation, every creak of the floorboards, every unlocked drawer. She wasn't the soldier she used to be, but a part of her training had returned. Not tactics, not weapons. Discipline. She began to test boundaries. One morning, she asked if she could walk in the fields. Taylor raised an eyebrow. "You want fresh air?" She nodded. "Just a few minutes, please." He seemed to consider it, then nodded slowly. 10 minutes. I'll be watching from the porch." She didn't look back. Her shoes sank into the dirt with each step, the morning dew soaking the hem of her skirt. The field stretched wide and silent before her. No fences, no guards, just distance, but she knew better. Distance was deceptive. Freedom wasn't about space, it was about permission. She returned before 10 minutes had passed. Taylor smiled. "See? Progress." Each day after that, she pushed a little more. A longer walk. A few minutes alone on the porch. A trip to the storage room under the guise of helping clean. Each time he allowed it. And each time she cataloged every door, every angle, every blind spot. Then one night, the power went out. A storm rolled in heavy clouds, crackling sky. The wind howled through the old windows. The house plunged into darkness with a shudder. Taylor cursed and lit a lantern. Generators out again. He moved toward the back room. "Stay here," he said. But she didn single quotes D. She moved quickly, silently. Down the hallway, past the kitchen, into the storage room. She knew what she was looking for now. Supplies. Anything that could help her last long enough to reach someone. She found a flashlight, a canteen, a ration tin, a small map folded behind a stack of old newspapers. Then, from behind her dash footsteps, she turned. Taylor stood in the doorway, soaking wet from the rain. His face unreadable. "What are you doing?" He asked. She froze. He stepped forward. "I asked you a question." She held the flashlight tighter. "I was looking for towels." "Towels," he repeated. His voice was calm, but his eyes were not. He walked toward her slowly. "You were doing so well. Why now?" She didn't answer. He stopped inches from her. Do you really think there's somewhere safer than here? Yes, she said. Something in him twitched. I've protected you, he said. No, she said. You've kept me. The silence that followed was the heaviest sound she'd ever heard. He stepped back as if the words had struck him. For a moment, she thought he might leave. But then his hand reached out slow, deliberate, and gripped her arm. You're not leaving, he said quietly. She pulled back. You don't understand what they do to you out there, he said. You think you'll be free? They'll ship you to some camp in Nebraska. You'll rot. No one will care. Maybe, she said, but at least I'd be a prisoner, not a possession. His grip tightened. Then voices. Shouting. Outside. Taylor turned. Through the window. Headlights. A vehicle. Military. Someone pounded on the door. Taylor let go of her. Don't say anything, he hissed. She didn't nod. She didn't move. He rushed out. Elsa stood frozen. For the first time in months, she felt something real. A chance. She followed. The front door was open. Rain slashed sideways across the porch. 3 men in uniform stood at the threshold. One held a clipboard. Another had a flashlight scanning the room. Captain Taylor? One asked. Yes, he said quickly. We're here for prisoner transfer. Female POW, listed under Elsa Koch. Taylor froze. That transfer was, we have orders. She's to be processed and moved, immediately. Elsa stepped into the doorway. The men looked at her. Taylor turned. Her eyes met his. Please, she said to the soldiers, take me with you. One of them stepped forward. Taylor blocked him. You don't understand. I do, the man said. You're done here, Captain. Taylor's face crumpled, not in anger, not in fear. In loss. He didn't argue. They gave her 5 minutes to gather her things. She didn't pack. She only took the paper from her shoe and placed it into the soldier's hand. Keep this, she said. It's proof. The man read it and whistled. Jesus. They left just before dawn. As the vehicle rolled away, Elsa looked back once. Taylor stood alone on the porch, soaked, his face unreadable. She turned away and didn't look again. The transport truck rumbled over muddy roads, heading east. The rain had stopped, but the clouds lingered, thick and gray. Elsa sat in the back, surrounded by crates and canvas, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Across from her sat Private Kenley, the soldier who'd taken her away from Taylor's house. He didn't speak much. He just watched her with the kind of cautious curiosity soldiers sometimes gave to prisoners they hadn't expected to care about. She didn't speak either. After nearly an hour, he broke the silence. You hungry? She shook her head. He offered a canteen. Water? She took it. Not out of trust, but out of necessity. After a few sips, she handed it back and returned her gaze to the horizon behind them. Where are we going? She asked. Camp Hollister, he said. Temporary holding. Then we'll see. She nodded. She didn't ask anything else. She didn't need to. What mattered was that she was gone from that place. But she knew deep down that the real prison was not Taylor's house. It was what had been done to her there. The time, the lies, the rewritten sense of reality. 3 days passed in Camp Hollister. Gray buildings, cold food, blank faces. A place meant to keep people from vanishing, but not to help them reappear. They gave her new clothes, took her statement, asked questions with clipped voices, barely looking at her. One officer glanced at the document she had handed over, retain, indefinitely, and muttered something, under his breath, about procedural overreach. She was processed, indexed, RELABELED. Forgotten again, but not entirely. On the 4th day, She was summoned to an office. A man in a suit waited behind a desk, files spread before him. "You're Elsa Koch," he said without looking up. "Yes. I'm with the War Department. Your case was flagged. Why now?" She asked. He looked at her. "Because someone in Taylor's command reported him." She said nothing. "We reviewed your file. You were never formally transferred. No paperwork for that location. You were lost in the system." "No," she said quietly. "I wasn't lost. I was taken." He paused. "You'll be sent to a permanent POW camp in Colorado. It's better run." Her jaw tightened. "I'm still a prisoner. For now," he said. "But with testimony, cooperation. Some POWs have been released into labor programs. Even families. I have no family here." He nodded. "Still, it's possible. Is it freedom? It's different." She left his office with no clearer path than before. That night, she sat on the edge of her cot, staring at the ceiling. Another camp. Another name. Another cage. But at least the lock was visible now. A week later, she boarded another truck. This time, there were 6 other women with her. All German. All quiet. None of them spoke much, but when the truck stopped for meals, one leaned over. "You were at a farm?" Elsa nodded. The woman looked away. "Me too." Another whispered. "I was in a house. Louisiana. A sergeant." A third said nothing. But her eyes told enough. They weren't prisoners of war. They were prisoners of opportunity. The camp in Colorado was cleaner, larger. Women were housed separately. Assigned duties: laundry, kitchen, clerical. Elsa was given a ledger job in the records office. There, she saw names, dates, transfers, and holes, so many holes in the paper. Trail of women like her. She started logging everything, quietly, carefully, a parallel record of what had been missed or buried. One day, she met an American woman named Ruth, a volunteer teacher running literacy classes for the prisoners. Ruth was kind, middle-aged, and curious. She noticed Elsa's sharp attention, her way of not just listening, but remembering. "You were educated," Ruth said one afternoon. "Yes." "University?" "Berlin." Ruth paused. "You speak English like you learned it from books." "I did." They sat in silence for a moment. "Do you want to write something?" Ruth asked. Elsa blinked. "What do you mean?" "Your story." Elsa's hands trembled slightly. "Would it matter?" "It might," Ruth said. "Even if no one listens now. Someday someone will." She hesitated. Then nodded. It started as a few pages. Then became 10. Then 50. Every detail. Every day. Every moment of silence and compliance and survival. She wrote in English, line by line, with Ruth helping to refine the grammar. A year passed. Then another. The war ended. Prisoners were processed for return or release. Some left in groups. Others alone. Elsa stayed. By choice. Her file had been marked voluntary delay. One evening, she stood at the edge of the camp fence, watching a bus pull away with former captives cheering through open windows. Kenley approached from the guardhouse. He looked older, softer. "You had a chance to leave," he said. "I know. Why stay?" "Because I'm not finished." "With what?" She held up a stack of pages, bound crudely with string. "This." He read the title aloud. The silence she carried. "What is it?" "My testimony." He nodded. "You want it published?" "No," she said. "I want it remembered." The next day, she gave the manuscript to Ruth, who promised to keep it safe. Years later, Ruth would donate it to a university archive, where it would gather dust for decades, until one student found it while researching wartime. Gender policy. It would become a paper, then a book, then a documentary got, and finally, a name carved into a memorial wall. Elsa Koch, German POW survivor, witness. She died in 1971 in a small house outside Denver. Never married. Never returned to Germany. Her story remained silent until others gave it voice. And even now, when someone stumbles upon that name, when they ask, "Who was she?" a voice whispers back from those pages, a woman who was kept but never claimed.